There's kind of this trend in large ensemble playing towards much smaller drums like the 5-inch shell or even piccolo drums with like very involved, expansive muffling devices, so we hear snare. It's like all about the snare sound, which I like very much, but you guys are all familiar with that kind of pingy overtone that we hear out of the drums. And it's nice to maybe take that out a little bit, but keep in mind in a big resonant space, especially if you're in a large ensemble, that ping completely gets sucked up by what's in front of you. So there's a point, I think, where you can over-muffle and you can kind of kill the natural resonance of a drum, right? So I'm not saying don't use small drums. I'm saying if you use small drums and really want that tight effect, maybe it's something reserved for like Lieutenant Kichi. Something that really is very, very crispy and it's not so much about resonance. But I'll see people in performance situations playing like Shostakovich and they've got a 5-inch drum that they've just muffled the hell out of. And it sounds very nice right there on top of it. You hear a lot of snare, but you're playing Shostakovich at triple, quadruple forte. You get out in the house and you may as well be playing on a drum pad. It doesn't have that resonant quality. So something to keep in mind. You obviously want to get it to sound the way you want, but having another pair of ears out in the house is always a good thing to do. So keep that in mind. Questions so far, guys? No? Yes, sir.
Do you have specific qualities you look for in a snare drum, whether like buying it or using it for a specific?
When I'm buying it.
When you're like, yeah, buying one or picking one for a specific kind of setting.
Well, when I was in college, it was like Clevelander was the thing. Everyone, that was the latest and greatest. And then as I became a professional, the Pearl Philharmonic series became the newest thing. For me, it was just sort of have the best technology with some of the different stylized snare mechanisms. And then for me, having a spectrum of sizes of drum, which usually when you're in college, unless you're independently wealthy, you know, you're lucky if you can own one drum, right? So you kind of want to get a mid-range drum. The biggest trend and difference that I've seen was that everyone owned a 6.5-inch snare drum, like when I was in college. If you owned one at all, that's what you got, because that was the all-around type drum. And it kind of has trended towards 5-inch drums, which, to tell you the truth, to me is more of an audition phenomenon than anything else, because people want to have, let's face it, it's really all about soft snare drumming. Like, that's the stuff that people worry the most about and want to sound. So, like, now my standard fare drum is a 5-inch drum that every time I play it in the orchestra, I set it up and go, wow, this sounds great. I play halfway through the piece, goes right back in the box, and I pull out a bigger, more resonant drum. It happens every single time. I just did, in January, we did Ein Heldenleben with Atlanta Symphony, and I got to play snare drum on that because their principal was out of town. That was a really nice week for me, actually. But you know, I brought 2 or 3 drums and tried one out, put it back, tried it. Everything was just way too tight and too anemic sounding, you know. And actually, that's a good point. I would say having a spectrum of drums is good. I never show up to a gig with just one instrument, if I can. You know, if I'm playing cymbals, I'll bring as much as I can get without killing myself schlepping stuff around. So, but in terms of buying, do you own a drum right now?
I do not.
Okay. I mean, Pearl Philharmonic makes an excellent drum. Majestic actually makes a very nice drum. Black Swan. There's a lot of really good companies, and most of the technology is fairly similar. We all steal, right? I mean, that's kind of it's a business of thieves in many ways. In many ways, the best way to make a drum sound good is to spend time with it and to buy good quality heads. Make sure your snares are seated well, and you just have to spend some time. I'm not really a tinkerer like some people are and really like to get in and experiment. But I mean, I know people that do that and they have their little workshops in their basement and they're tuning and tinkering, and again, they get it to the hall and everything changes, you know. So get a good drum. It's a good investment. Get the nice quality thick maple shell. Like if you're gonna buy your first drum, make sure it's a good one. You know, it's not the kind of thing you want to skimp on. And fortunately, like our sticks, generally speaking, are very cheap. You know, especially if you have an endorsement. So, but you got to practice to get those. So, good question. Other thoughts about solo playing, general snare drum stuff? No.
What kind of muffling devices do you like to use?
I actually use most of the time. About the most muffling I'll do is this little deal right here, just this kind of little chamois thing. That's probably a little more than I would normally use, but it's nice to have some different weights. So like I have some different things, different little pads and things that I'll keep for major situations. But generally speaking, for most of my playing, I will use this to varying degrees. Like I'll kind of leave it like that sometimes, or move it further out and just make little subtle adjustments. But by and large, I don't like to muffle too much. I mean, I really used to. I really was into that crispy sound, and you spend enough time out in the house listening to what drums sound like, and it can kind of change your impact. So if you haven't done that sort of thing, go and, go to one of your, maybe not be an ensemble you're playing in, but go sit in on another rehearsal. Just sit out in the house and just listen and pay attention to the acoustical properties and see what's coming out. It'll probably surprise you what you hear when you're on top versus when you're out. Yes, sir.
Is that muffling, is that what you would recommend or what you enjoy for like an ensemble playing or for solo rudiments?
Well, I'm actually going to do a rudimental solo here in just a minute, and I'm going to use that muffling on this drum. But again, to tell you the truth, I was really thinking about playing it on the rope drum until you told me I was going to have to use the strap. That would be a little too much for me. It's really personal choice, and then it's good to have different options, because ultimately, I especially talk about this a lot in my auxiliary clinic, you got to do what the conductor wants. Because we all have these ideas of what we want things to sound like, and then that's all well and good, but when your conductor asks for something, they're the boss, right? Being in band, orchestra, whatever. That's true in college, that's also true in the professional world, So my general thing is not to muffle a lot, and I tell you still, this is like such a middle school, high school thing to do, but like really, if you're really searching all of a sudden, the wallet is a very quick way to, and there's never a whole lot of weight in here, trust me. So, that's a quick way to add just a tiny little bit of subtle muffling. So, good. Did that answer?
Yeah, I was just confused on whether you would like take that off completely for an ensemble.
It totally depends on what I'm playing. Totally depends. Let me just say this: if I'm playing Ensemble, for example, I'm not going to muffle anything because I want the biggest, most resonant sound I can get. And even then, to tell you the truth, I'd say I don't think field drums get used often enough in large ensembles. I use field drum way more than most people I know for big spots. I was just doing Romeo and Juliet a couple weeks ago, the Prokofiev, the ballet, and they did that spot. You guys know the march to the Tybalt's march, like the death march, that dun 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 dun. They did it so slow that I was actually like, let me try this. I actually set up two drums, a field drum and a snare drum, and did like this. It was slow enough to do it that way, and it was like a really big, cool sound. I think Prokofiev, like in the suites, actually asks two people to play that part. But in the ballet, you only have only so many hands and so many people can get to all the stuff. So it's a nice effect. And I would say for marches especially, that was something we did a lot in the band. I don't know if you guys ever did this in your band, but like we would have like a piccolo drum and then a big old rope drum next to it, and get those two colors at the same time. One would play on the trio, one would play on the dogfight, and you mix and match. And it's really a lot of colors that can be had. I always, when I was in college, I bought a drum and that's what I used because that's what I had. But honestly, as many different options, and muffling devices are easy to come up with. There's lots of different ways to do it. So be prepared to do what your conductor wants, and to, like I said, have someone out in the house say, you know what, you over muffled there. It doesn't sound like it here, but out there it does. Cool.